Hello all, and welcome to Buddha Dharma with Jikai. Today I will be discussing the foreword to Zhiyi's Xiao Zhiguan, written by Yuanzhao of the Northern Song dynasty. This short introduction is filled with references to the broader Tiantai system, and it shows Yuanzhao's familiarity with the ideas of Zhiyi. However, Yuanzhao's introduction is not always included in the English translations of the Xiao Zhiguan, and therefore sometimes gets overlooked by those who are keen to jump into the work proper. This is somewhat understandable, given that it was written during the Song, long after the work itself. Nevertheless, Yuanzhao existed in a time far less removed from Zhiyi than ourselves, and it's evident that he had a reasonably firm grasp of the tradition and its materials. I will go through the text chunk by chunk and discuss the implications of each passage on screen. As you can see, I have highlighted each clause of the text in both the Chinese original and the English. This will hopefully allow those who are keen to engage with and study the Chinese original, and provide those more informed than myself to offer suggestions and corrections to the specific passage in question. Zhiyi's Xiao Zhiguan has been translated into English a number of times now, and I'd ask my viewers here not to disregard those translations where I and they differ. Whether or not my translations are accurate or not should be immediately clear to the viewer, given my inclusion of the Chinese. I do, it should be noted, indeed differ in my translation from those previously published. The most well-known English translation of the foreword is well done, and its translator is both a far better scholar and practitioner than myself. Nevertheless, I have here felt it necessary to produce my own translation. I do this not to slight the work of the aforementioned scholar-practitioner, but because I believe in this case that certain allusions in the text were not fully represented. Again, I wish to stress that this is not a question of the former translator's linguistic skill. Indeed, said translator is far better versed in the intricacies of literary Sinitic than I could hope to be at this stage. The difference, then, in our translations comes from my being a member of the tradition that produced the text, and therefore perhaps more familiar with its images and themes. In short, the former translator can be said to have translated the text accurately, in my opinion, as concerns the language. What I might hope to clarify here is those passages that imply more than they seem to, and that require a knowledge of the Tiantai tradition's particulars. It should be noted that I am by no means a master, and my explanations will therefore not be exhaustive. I hope simply to make clear some of those things of which I am aware that may be missed by the general or even the well-versed reader. All of this said, I encourage those interested enough to watch this video to compare my translation with the other available English versions, and to decide for yourself whether or not I have added or obscured the meaning of the text. I will, in my translation here, render many of the Chinese terms into Sanskrit rather than translate the terms directly into English. Now, this is simply so that I can make clear what is at stake in the discussion for those with a background in Buddhism and Buddhist studies. Finally, before we begin, I ask you to forgive any limitations in the productions of this short video. They are nothing more than the limitations of my computer literacy. I hope that these limitations do not nullify any of the benefit that might be had by watching this short discussion. Now, although today's discussion will be limited to the foreword, the text to which this introduction is pinned is, as I said, Tiantai Zhiyi's Xiao Zhiguan, as we can see here. I translate this, as you can see, as the essential methods for the practice of shamatha and vipassana seated meditation. The text is also known by two alternate titles, and that is the Xiao Zhiguan, or the smaller shamatha and vipassana, or the Tongmen Zhiguan, that is the shamatha and vipassana for the uninitiated. Now, I've translated the Tongmen here as uninitiated. It literally means an immature child or an ignorant youngster, as far as the characters are concerned. But I take it here to mean those who are unfamiliar uneducated in the methods of Shimada and Vipassana. And as most of you watching this video will probably already know, this text was narrated by the Shamana Zhiyi of the Xiuqian temple on Mount Tiantai. Without further ado, let us begin in our look at Yuanzhao's foreword. Now, the Chinese character here that I've translated as forward, or xu, it literally just means to introduce something. And so the former translator that I mentioned of this text renders it simply as introduction, I believe. However, as this introduction is written by someone other than the author of the text, that is, other than Zhiyi, I render it here as a foreword. In either case, the semantic meaning of the term isn't obscured in any way. All right. So the first line in the Chinese is as follows. 天台之观有四本, 一曰圆顿之观, which I've rendered here as the Shimada and Wabasha of the Tiantai school consists of 4 texts. The first is referred to as the perfect and sudden Shimada and Vipassana. Now this Yuandun Zhiguan, or the perfect and sudden Shimada and Vipassana, is an alternate title, perhaps depending on how you evaluate Zhanran's commentary, is perhaps the original title of what has become the Mohe Zhiguan, that is Zhiyi's magnum opus. A masterful and fully annotated English translation of this work exists now, thankfully, due to the tireless works of Dr. Paul Swanson. His translation also includes, as an appendix, a translation of this work, the XiaoZhiguan. However, the foreword of Yuanzhao, which we're discussing here today, is not included. Now, Bhikshu Dharma Mitra's translation of the XiaoZhiguan does contain the foreword, and I invite you to compare it with the translation I provide here. So just before we move on, the Mohe Zhiguan, as I mentioned, is Tiantai Zhiyi's magnum opus. It is one of the Tiantai Sandabu, or the 3 great works of Tiantai, the 3 main works in the Tiantai Tendai tradition. And so it's therefore served as a textbook for the tradition's monastic training in both China and Japan. Mohe Zhiguan simply means the great Shimada and Vipassana. A keen listener might already have noticed that the name of this text parallels the title of the text we're now looking at. That is the smaller Shimada and Vipassana, or the XiaoZhiguan. This work contains, that is the Mohe Zhiguan, contains the optimum meditative methods of the Tiantai Tendai school. This method is properly the method Zhiyi himself employed, and so it's considered perhaps the more difficult of the methods in the Tiantai meditative corpus. Our next line reads as follows. 大师于晋州月川寺说, 张安即为世转. The great master expounded it at the Yuchuan temple in Jingzhou, and Zhang'an, that is Guanding, recorded it in 10 fascicles. Okay. The Yuchuan temple, literally the jade spring temple, spring as in a water spring. Zhang'an Guanding was one of Tiantai Zhiyi's most trusted disciples, and many of Zhiyi's texts were given orally by the master and then recorded and edited by Guanding. Just to cover our vocabulary here, a fascicle, that word in English, is derived from the Latin fascis or fasciculus, which basically means a bundle of something. And so it essentially in this context means a scroll. So 10 fascicles, 10 scrolls, or 10 bundles. Next we have 二也, 见字之观, 在瓦官此说, 弟子发真集, 奔三十转, 张安制定为十转, 进场婆罗米时. Okay. So the second is called the Gradual and Sequential Shimada and Vipassana. It was explained at the Wagwan temple and recorded by the disciple Fajan. It was originally 30 fascicles, but Zhang'an edited it into 10 fascicles. And this is the present Dhyana Paramita, right? The Dhyana Paramita. Now, Fajan, the individual mentioned here as the original recorder, was another of Zhiyi's disciples. Now, the Gradual and Sequential Shimada and Vipassana, also called here by the abbreviated title of the work that outlines it, that is the Dhyana Paramita, is perhaps Zhiyi's most technically detailed meditation text. It has unfortunately been overshadowed somewhat by the Zhiguan. Now, the text contains what is called the Gradual and Successive, or the Gradual and Sequential Shimada and Vipassana. As the name might suggest, this is a method of gradual progression through clearly defined stages from the provisional or shallow to the ultimate or profound. Okay. 上曰不定之广，继承向熟林，冒习庆大师徒，又一转进六妙门时. Okay, the third is referred to as the unfixed or undetermined Shimada and Vipassana. The Chen official Mao Xi requested that the great master set it forth. It consists of one fascicle, and it is the present 6 Sublime Gates. Now, the 6 Sublime Gates has also been translated by Bhikshu Dharmamitra, and I encourage anyone interested in the work to support his translation efforts. This method essentially takes the clearly defined steps of the above gradual method and applies them in an unfixed way. In other words, steps or stages are introduced depending on the spatial and or temporal circumstances, or the capacity and experience of the individual in question. Okay. And finally we have 四也XiaoZhiguan 寂今问世大是为素雄称真出是大补之根该儒道之枢机. Okay, the fourth is called the smaller Shimada and Vipassana, and is the present work, that is the work in which we are now engaged. The great master put it forth for the sake of his secular brother Chen Zhen. It is truly a synopsis of the great text, that is the Zhiguan, and the crucial elements for entering the way. Okay. So as I said, we've now arrived at the description for the text to which this foreword is appended. Secular brother here, Su Xiong, reminds us that as a monastic, all other monastics under the same teacher would have been religious brothers of Zhiyi. This tells us then that this work is designed primarily for lay members rather than monastics as such. Nevertheless, it is used as an introductory manual for both the ordained and lay community. The great text, as I mentioned, is the Zhiguan that we discussed above, to which this book is called a synopsis. Now, it's worth remembering that Mohe here, Mohe, is the Chinese rendering of the Sanskrit Maha, as in Mahayana, right, the great vehicle. Okay, so this means great, essentially. Mohe means great, and thus we have the work being called here the great text. Okay. 越知观越定慧越计较越明净皆同出而以明也. Okay, it may be called Shimada and Vipassana, called Samadhi and Pratnya, called silent and radiant, called luminous and quiescent. They all arise from the same source, and yet are different names. Okay. The first part that probably ought to be explained is this passage here. 皆同出而以明也. They all arise from the same source, and yet are different names. Now, the word source is not present here, but it's not unusual for Chinese to omit the object or subject of a sentence. Now this tells us that each pair of terms that we have here is to be understood as equivalents of each other. That is, shamatha is samadhi, is silent. Vipassana is pratnya, is radiant. Now you'll notice that I did not include the last pair here, the last pair, that is mingjing. Why might I have saved those for further explanation? When we look at these two terms and compare them with the other sets of terms here, we might conclude that they seem to be backwards. In other words, it looks like the former word, that is luminous or ming, has more in common with vipassana and its synonyms, and that the latter word, quiescent or jing, appears to have more in common with shamatha. This reversal of terms is intentional. In fact, these two terms are used as descriptives for the qualities of shamatha and vipassana in Guanding's foreword to the Mohe Zhiguan. Miaole Dashi Zhanzhan, a later Tiantai master, and in fact the authoritative source for the commentaries on Zhiyi's works, tells us that we are right to see these two terms as reversed. He states the following: 智观儿子，正实问题, which I render here as the two characters of zhi, that is shamatha, and guan, vipassana, demonstrate correctly the essence, ti, of the teachings made known, by Zhiyi. He further states, 命尽儿子，探题得也，谓之体经，观题命也. That is, the two characters ming, or luminous, and jing, or quiescence, expound the virtuous quality of this essence. To wit, the essence of guan, that is vipassana, is luminosity. The essence of zhi, that is shamatha, is quiescence. Okay? 是正是常，正观是法，莫非智观，替贤命尽，则同质疑不，亦为所闻. From start to finish, the 10 chapters, that is of the Mohe Zhiguan, and the 10 methods of contemplation, which are outlined in the Mohe Zhiguan's chapter 7, there is none which is not of shamatha and vipassana, and all of this essence is luminous and quiescent. All of this essence is luminous and quiescent, okay? This is the case for all that has been made known, all right? And Zhanran adds this nice, tasty morsel afterwards. He says, 入法华经，本门寂门，无非妙法，体现正实. Like the Dharma Flower Sutra, that is the Lotus Sutra, which has the origin gate, the Benmen, and the trace gate, Jimen. Neither is not the sublime Dharma, that is the Miaofa, and all of its essence is the true, 正实. Okay. Therefore, if we summarize all of Zhanran's remarks here, the reversal of these two characters is indeed intentional. As Zhanran told us here, the entire essence of the Lotus Sutra is the truth. For our purposes, we come to see that the whole essence of shamatha is both quiescence and luminousness. The whole essence of vipassana is both luminous and quiescent. Now, the two may be described as different forms of meditation, but in truth, they cannot be neatly separated or distinguished in that way. They are, in fact, more like two sides of the same coin, rather than separate practices as such. And this is that same source that we were told they arise from. To be of the same source does not mean, I might clarify, that they disintegrate into vague platitudinal statements. It means that they cannot, in the final analysis, be properly distinct. Okay? All right. 若复穷万法之愿力，考诸佛之修真， 莫若之光. As for exhausting the source of the 10,000 dharmas, or examining the cultivation and realization of all the Buddhas, it would not be equal to shamatha and vipassana. All right. Now, I've rendered the Chinese fairly literally here, so unfortunately it may make for less than ideal English. But with a little help, I think we can see what is being implied here. 10,000 dharmas is a common Buddhist expression implying all phenomena, everything that can be said to exist. Now, those who are familiar with Buddhism will know that the term Dharma in this context does not mean teachings or doctrines per se, but things, that is, phenomena. The famous quote from the Zhu Shelun, or the Abhidharma Koshabhashyam, Dharma Dharanad Lakshana. Dharma is something which supports a lakshana, a characteristic. So to exhaust the source of the 10,000 dharmas then means to go through entirely, to know the nature and the characteristics, the lakshana of all dharmas or phenomena. Now this, of course, would be a particularly difficult feat to accomplish. And likewise, to examine the cultivation and realizations of all the Buddhas would be a truly stupendous task. Buddhas are numberless, like beings, let alone the practices and realizations each of them accumulates. And yet, neither of these acts would be equal to the practice of shamatha and vipassana. And so, while my English rendering might seem a little vague on first glance, if we pay attention to what is being said in the text, I think the meaning becomes fairly clear. 天台大师令山进城诚之观念. Okay, that which Great Master Tiantai, that is Zhiyi, received in person, 进城, in person, at Mount Gudrakuta, was the transmission of shamatha and vipassana. Okay, now Mount Gudrakuta is Vulture Peak. It is the site and location for, according to our school, the highest of Shakyamuni Buddha's teachings. That is, the Lotus Sutra, or the Saddharma Pundarika Sutra, which Janran mentioned earlier. In order to understand what it would mean for Zhiyi, a Chinese monk living in the Common Era, to personally receive, to receive in person something from Shakyamuni Buddha on Mount Gudrakuta during the Lotus Sutra, we need to know a little bit about the Tiantai tradition. Zhiyi, the author of our text here, trained under a master named Huisi. Now, Huisi lived on Mount Dasu, or Dasushan. Master Huisi is said to have been so shocked by Zhiyi's great knowledge and abilities that he exclaimed that they both had heard the Lotus Sutra from Shakyamuni Buddha on Mount Gudrakuta in the past, and that their coming together now, in this life, on Mount Dasu, was the result of that former karmic bond. So here we're being told that that which Zhiyi received during his time on Mount Gudrakuta was none other than the methods of shamatha and vipassana. In other words, the Lotus Sutra, esteemed as the pinnacle of the Buddha's teachings, is being compared with the practice of shamatha and vipassana. We have here the first inkling of what will become a common theme both here in this text and in the entire Tiantai system. That is the balance and necessity of both practice and doctrine. In Chinese, this is usually written as jiaoguan. And this comment here might be understood as an attempt to ward off any tendency to consider the Buddha's highest teachings, that is doctrine, that is the Lotus Sutra, to be far and above his highest praxis, which we're being told here is shamatha and vipassana meditation. Dasu Miao Wu Zhi Guan Ye. The Sublime Awakening on Mount Dasu was the realization of shamatha and vipassana. Now, anyone comparing my translation here with the translation of Bhikshu Dharmamitra will notice that they differ quite significantly. Bhikshu Dharmamitra's translation of this passage reads as for the marvelous awakening of the great arousing, it is the awakening to calming and insight. Calming and insight here is his translation of the two terms shamatha and vipassana. Now, Bhikshu Dharmamitra translates Dasu as the meaning of the two characters Da and Su would decree. However, as I mentioned at the beginning of this discussion, as a member of the tradition and someone intimately familiar with Zhiyi's story, I was, of course, aware that Zhiyi's master Huisi lived on Mount Dasu, and Zhiyi's biography tells us that he had an awakening experience, which occurred when he read about the self-immolation of Sarvasattva Priyadarshana in the chapter on the Medicine King Bodhisattva by Sajjaraja Bodhisattva. And his biography says that his body and mind were emptied and he entered quiescent into contemplation. His understanding of the lotus was like a high light shining into a dark valley. His attainment to the nature of the dharmas resembled a long and coursing wind through empty space. Now, the event is significant within the Tiantai school's narrative, and images like the one which I have put here, even including the inscription with the four characters in question here, that is Da Su Miao Wu, are very common depictions. And I've put the four characters here because they're a little bit hard to see on the image. The awakening experience that we just heard about previously, that is the one on Mount Gudrakuta, or Vulture Peak, and this second one here on Mount Dasu, are known as the two awakenings of Zhiyi. Okay? These two awakenings are essentially the source for all of Zhiyi's teachings. Sammei suo xiu, Xiao-Zhiguan ye. That which he cultivated in Samadhi is the practice of shamatha and vipassana. In other words, that which one practices in order to achieve Samadhi is shamatha and vipassana. Now, this doesn't take too much to unpack. Samadhi is none other than the perfect meditative absorption of the mind. It is the mind that becomes fixed as opposed to scattered. And it is the mind in which the intent is undivided. Now, these descriptives differ in no major way from those that we saw used to describe shamatha and vipassana earlier. Okay. 从辩而说，说之观也. When he engaged in discussion and expounded, he spoke of shamatha and vipassana. That is, when he used his mighty powers of intellectual investigation, when he discussed with other great masters, when he attempted to distill via his eloquent discourse those things which he had awakened to, he inevitably spoke of shamatha and vipassana. Okay. 故曰，说即心中所信法门. Okay. Therefore, he said, I expound those Dharma gates which I practiced in my own mind. Again, attentive readers will notice that my translation here differs quite a lot from Bhikshu Dharmamitra's. Now, Bhikshu Dharmamitra's translation, as we can see here, reads as follows. Therefore, one may say that when it comes to explicating those Dharma gateways of one's mind, or one's own mind, which are practiced, although the text of the... Now, Dharmamitra's sentence continues and joins what I consider to be the next sentence. I wish to stress again that his translation is a solid attempt at interpreting the Chinese in question, and I wish in no way to disparage his work. In this case, as in the last, however, it is a familiarity with the Tiantai tradition that affords me with a different, and I hope, more accurate way of reading the passage. Yuanzhao is in fact quoting from Guanding's foreword to Zhiyi's Zhiguan. Therein, we find the following words. 自知智观, 天台智者所记心中所信法门. This Shimada in Vipassana, 天台智者, that is Zhiyi, expounds is the Dharma gate which he practiced in his own mind. Now, Zhangran gives us this in his commentary on the passage. 样说即心中所行法门, 即障安密说从大师德所行之法也。故觉所行，亦嫌所准。若准而不习，又言勿行。将何以辨所准不空？故知所准，即即所行，亦令后代行废遗言，所以亦不并为性想。Which I've translated as follows. The expression Dharma gate, which he practiced in his own mind, means that Zhang'an, that is Guanding, in private consultation with Zhiyi, from the great master, that is Zhiyi, received these practice methods. Therefore, by raising up that which is practiced, accordingly that which is transmitted is revealed. If one has the transmission but does not cultivate, one has words and no practice. How could you determine that that which was transmitted was not empty, that is, meaningless? Therefore, know that that which was transmitted was none other than that which he cultivated himself. Additionally, to ensure that later generations who practice otherwise, disobeying what is said, this text is given as the characteristics of practice. So we again have a reminder here in Zhangran's remarks of the crucial importance of both practice and study, of cultivation and knowledge. I hope that my translation of this passage, while different from the others we mentioned, has been made clear here. 自知太教纵补随凡，要归不处之管。 Therefore, know that although the teachings, principles, and works of Tiantai are numerous, the essentials do not go beyond shamatha and vipassana. Okay, so as we mentioned, Bhikshu Dharmamita's translation merges this sentence with the previous one. However, as it should be clear now, my reading does not require that conjunction. The final difference between our two approaches to this passage and the previous set of passages that I think it's worth noting here is the following. One will probably have noticed, if you've been comparing the translations, that in Dharmamita's reading, the passages above are made as general descriptive statements. That is, for example, that one cultivates in Samadhi, Samatha and Vipassana, or that which one cultivates in Samadhi is Shamatha and Vipassana. However, in my reading, you'll notice that these passages are not general, but specifically that which Zhiyi does. In either case, the Chinese does not have the subject, and so either reading is a fair attempt at rendering the passages. Nevertheless, I hope that by showing that this section begins with Zhiyi's two awakening experiences, that is the one on Mount Gudrakuta or Lingshan, and the awakening experience on Mount Dasu, and ends with a quote about the practice he himself undertook, I think it's reasonable to interpret these passages as relating specifically to what Zhiyi did, as opposed to being general statements about the nature of Shamatha and Vipassana. Xiao Zhiguan, 不足以明天台道，不足以依天台照. Discarding Shamatha and Vipassana, wisdom is insufficient for the practice of Tiantai, and discourse is insufficient for the doctrines of Tiantai. Now that we've provided examples both from Yuanzhao's Foreword previously and from Zhangran's commentary to the Zhiguan, showing how significant the concept of balancing and maintaining both doctrinal study and cultivation of the practice, this passage should be quite clear to us. And here, where we are warned, without a grounding in Shimada and Vipassana, both the doctrine and cultivation of Tiantai Buddhism will be beyond us. If we discard these methods, we discard all of Buddhism. There is no practice or doctrine without it. And anyone telling you otherwise, according to Yuanzhao here, is a Mara in disguise, a Mara Papilla. "故入道者不可不学，学者不可不修." Therefore, those entering the practice cannot but study it. Those who study cannot but cultivate it. If we wish to study the doctrines, we must engage in shamatha and vipassana. If we wish to cultivate the practice, we must engage in shamatha and vipassana. "奈何术士挂脖，其走圣理，或教故于冥想，或混淆于暗证." How could one, in the final age of destitution, rush about for reputation and benefit, or be yoked to names and appearances, or mislead by obscure evidence? Given the predicament that we saw above, how could one contribute to the confusion and delusion of others? In this age so far from the Shakyamuni's time, how could one run hither and thither in search of fame or reputation, profit or benefit? And how could one be attached to the superfluous, the names and appearances of things, rather than the essence? The only note that I should add about my translation here, the term 教固, which I've translated here as be yoked to. 教固 literally means to be glued to something, to be stuck to something, which is why I chose the translation to be yoked to. 气数遂存，而至观之道灭闻欲始. Although this text exists, nevertheless, the practice of shamatha and vipassana is not known in these times. Unfortunately, although Zhiyi and his disciples, such as Guanding and Fajan, have brought these texts explaining these essential methods for us into the world, they are not, at the time of Yuanzhao's writing, well known. Many are left in the dark, and such methods are known only by those fortunate enough to receive them. Now one can imagine how unlikely it was that one would be educated enough in times past to even approach literature of this sort. Even if one did possess the requisite knowledge, the chances that one would encounter a hand-copied manuscript version of the text were slim at best. 得不为之，痛心疾受哉. How could this not pain one's heart and enrage the mind? Okay, and naturally, if we take these realities to heart, that is, the difficulty of coming across, handwritten copies of this text, let alone teachers who can explicate its deeper significance, and then accept the consequences outlined here for not following these teachings of Shimada and Vipassana, surely we would be pained of heart and enraged of mind. 今以自熟，命功漏板，将是问者见者，皆知大成愿中，况有修有证者， 则其力象可量也. Now this text has been made into wood blocks to cause those who hear and those who see it all to plant the causal seeds of the great vehicle, that is, the Mahayana. How much more so those who practice it and those who realize it, and so its benefit will be beyond that which could be measured. Okay, so in other words, there is hope. The reason for Yuanzhao's writing of this introduction, this foreword, is the commissioning of a woodblock edition of this text. This is essentially the early printing press. To have a copy of this text engraved in wooden plank or slats that could be used to produce multiple copies for distribution is a great boon. It is the precise overcoming, or the potential overcoming, of this text's obscurity, which we had just previously lamented. 乐音对晓, 乃为数音. I, as a result of collating and correcting the text, therefore utter this introduction. So we see here that Yuanzhao was not only involved in this process to write the introduction, but he was also involved in the comparing and correcting of the various manuscripts used as the prototypes for these woodblocks. And this is why I would caution anyone who thinks that the introductions appended to these kinds of works are unnecessary. They were oftentimes written by highly skilled and educated scholar monastics who genuinely cared about the propagation of the faith. Now we have seen, I hope, from above, that Yuanzhao appears to have been the right man for the job. "是绍圣2年，仲秋朔，余杭君，是元照数." On the occasion of the second year of Shaosheng, that is 1096 AD, on the first day of the second month of autumn, forward of the Shakyan Yuanzhao of Yuhang County. Now, Shakyan became a common epithet for Buddhist monastics in China. It obviously marks them as sons of the Buddha, inasmuch as they are now members of his Shakya clan. The prevalent use of this title may have coincided with the rise of later religious Taoism, which meant that monasticism was no longer restricted to Buddhists. And this passage essentially concludes the introduction by Yuanzhao. I hope I have included some information useful to practitioners and scholars of the topics at hand, and I hope I haven't talked too long on too many obscurities. I'd like to say again that I do not wish my translations here to be seen as criticisms of previous attempts, but I would be remiss if I did not clarify where I felt it necessary. Here I stand, I can do no other. If anyone has any feedback, no matter how small, I'd be very pleased to hear it. I would also appreciate any corrections that others may offer, as I have no doubt that my reading here includes sufficient errors to be greatly improvable. Finally, if any of you find such videos useful and beneficial, I may continue to make said explanatory videos after the lockdowns have ended. If I were to continue, I'd perhaps go through the whole of the XiaoZhiguan before moving on to other texts, so please do let me know if you'd like me to continue, and if there are any particular texts you'd like me to go through in this fashion. And finally, I would like to apologize to any native Chinese speakers. As a non-native speaker, my tones in Chinese leave a lot to be desired. But as classical Chinese is a literary language, that doesn't cause any issue with my understanding of the texts. It just makes my recitation and reading of the texts not especially beautiful. So I do apologize to any native speaker of Chinese who cringed at my many tonal mistakes. And thank you for listening. Thank you very much, and I hope you're all staying well and safe.